Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Nell Stacey Daddies, and welcome this afternoon to a very momentous occasion. I think the event, as it's titled, reflecting on TRC, on the TRC, and on 30 years of democracy, it's so fitting that we are having this event this afternoon in this venue, because as you can see, the visuals around us echo the importance of today's discussion. So thank you so much for joining us in this very cold weather. And as an extension as well of our Women's Day celebrations, this is going to be an incredibly insightful conversation. So while I'm here to welcome you this afternoon, I also need to remind you of the second iteration or the second part of today's event, which is dance and music as a political voice of repair, which will be taking place this afternoon at 5 p.m. Please brave the cold. I think it will be worth it. So I really hope that you all can join us this afternoon for the second part of today's events. So with that, I would like to invite the director of our center to the podium, Professor Pumla Gobodo-Madikizela.
Thank you very much, Anel, for that those welcoming remarks. And thank you to the museum for allowing us to use the space. In fact, there's even more than just allowing us to use the space. The idea for this conversation emerged in conversations with Mariki Olufsen and the director of the museum on their idea of 30 years of reflecting on democracy. We wanted to have this conversation as part of Mariki's series because it's such a momentous event, momentous period, as Anel says, and invited the two women who have been partners with us in conversations on this question of democracy and the afterlife of the Truth Commission for a number of years, particularly Mrs. Calata, who has been working with us for a number of years. Wherever she's partnered with us in these conversations. So, for example, yesterday she was in a class, an honors class on violent histories and repair that AVREC is offering. It's an interdisciplinary class, but it's offered through the sociology and anthropology departments. And so Nomonde, Mrs. Calata, was part of that conversation. And one of the things that I want to mention about that is that this was a conversation, it was a class, it's part of the series, a lecture, seminar, but it was also a conversation between Mrs. Calata and the younger generation. And that is to say, young people who were not born until after 1994. And that for us, you know, Tamar was there, Professor Garb, you hear a little bit about her as she's introduced in the flyers. And we sat there with her and Mrs. Calata, and it was just so heartwarming to see how these young people were receiving the story of Mrs. Calata and how for them it was such a moment of education beyond what you can teach through the curriculum, you know, in terms of the, you know, stuff that you learn in books. Here was Mrs. Calata, they were in conversation with her, she was sharing with them her story. And so in a way, this is for us an extension of that. And it's wonderful to see young people in this room, so many of you, they're of course the oldies like us, but to see the young people in the audience is really very encouraging. I just want to echo, because we don't want to forget that we have a second iteration in the evening, to echo Anel, to say this evening we have some of the most celebrated artists coming to be in conversation with us and with Mrs. Seipati, Mlangeni and Calata. Both of them young Standard Bank awardees in their times. Gregory Magoma, 25 years earlier, and then 25 years later, Mandla Mlangeni. I mean, how great is that we have some of the best artists and they were celebrated in the country. They are going to be here with us, so please do come and join us. And now, really very briefly introduce, because we've seen the write-up on these speakers, to introduce the panelists in front of us today. I will leave Professor Garb to introduce Sisonke Msimang when she steps up. But for now, we'll start with them on the stage. Mrs. Calata and Mrs. Mlangeni, their stories are part of our history in South Africa. Their stories, in fact, are the reason we have to stay with the stories of violence, of apartheid violence, because they are stories that are not finished. What we talked about yesterday in class was precisely this idea that this is unfinished business. And it's not just in theory. You know, we say unfinished business as something that is repeated, you know, globally, unfinished business of trauma. But for the students to actually witness how the memory of Mrs. Calata's story lives in her as she was telling a story. And now you're going to hear as well from Mrs. Mlangeni, both of their husbands who were murdered by the apartheid state, violently murdered by the apartheid state, and how that story is still ongoing, because for them, there is something that still eludes them about what is the truth about that. And so we think about these stories when we are thinking about our own story in our university, this institution, when there's so much of this violence that keeps on exploding at certain moments, the violence of racism. And so how do we think through what is going on today at our institution through their stories and what they've gone through, and how those stories continue to live? And how better to have this conversation facilitated than Professor Garb, whom so many of you know from conversations we've had here and at AVREC. So without much further ado, I'm going to invite you to please lead us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pumla, and thanks again to AVREC for creating this space. This is such a unique environment, an environment in which we can think together, where we can live with the pain of the past in a way that involves acknowledging it, but also creatively engaging with it and thinking critically about what it has meant in our lives and how we take it forward, how we live with it, how we live alongside it, how it lives in our bodies. And we acknowledge it, we in a way celebrate it at the same time as we don't idealize it. We talked yesterday in class with Mrs. Calata about what it is to look for closure, what it is to transcend pain, and what it is to abide with pain in life, whether there is ever a point at which closure can be reached, or whether it is the living with pain, which is the story of our lives. So I am deeply honored to be in conversation both with Nomonde Calata and with Seipati Mlangeni. We have got to know each other a little bit over the last couple of days. And I feel, again, as Pumla said, for us, for women of our generation, who share a particular history, even if from very, very different vantage points, it is extraordinary to have the space that you have created, and we will invite everybody to participate in the conversation as we go on. Just a few introductory comments. As Pumla said, we mark 30 years since the beginning of democracy. We mark 30 odd years since the TRC, when both Mrs. Calata and Mrs. Mlangeni testified. And many of you will know the footage of their testimony at the TRC. It is extremely affecting and disturbing in many, many ways. In preparation for this conversation, I re-looked at some of that footage. I saw, Nomonde, how your body produced a response. The cry of Nomonde Calata is one of the epic signifiers of that moment of visceral expression of pain in the face of violence and its history, and in the expression of grief, which is an ongoing emotion and sentiment that we might want to talk about. And I saw Seipati as well you, a young 24-year-old widow, collapse in the arms of a female attendant accompanied by your mother, I saw the community of women that surrounded you both, the attempts at comfort and the attempts at acknowledgement of your pain and suffering, but the overwhelmingness of that moment of emotional intensity. And in looking at it now, 30 years later, I was struck by the spectacle of grief that both of you were exposed to and exposed yourselves to with such dignity and bravery. And I suppose I wanted to start the conversation by asking you now to think back on that moment. What, when you think about it now, did that moment of testifying mean for you? Was there any catharsis? Was it an experience that you feel had some kind of positive effect in managing your pain? Or did it feel now, when you think about it, as that you were performing for audiences that were not yourself? I mean, how do you regard that moment now, when you think back?
Thank you. You know, when I went to the TRC, I had high hopes. I wanted the truth and only the truth. I wanted to know what exactly happened. Looking back today, it feels like I was asked to go there and be an actress. When I look back, I did not get what I expected. I don't know if perhaps I had high hopes. I was not looking for much, but the little things that you would, expect. When I went there and I went in front of the commission and poured out, my grief. After, I was expecting perhaps a follow-up, to say, we acknowledged, what you came here for, and we're doing our utmost best to investigate. And perhaps the little thing that I was expecting is to get somebody to say, how are you feeling? And I don't know if that was asking much, but I don't remember getting that. From outside of the TRC, it's when, when you get people to say, what, you need to go for counseling. And I was expecting that.
And did the disappointment happen soon after, or is that now in reflection, looking back? Or the feeling of having been abandoned in a way in your grief?
A few months later, the disappointment happened because, for counseling, I was expecting a call.
A follow-up.
That follow-up call to say, what, or it's us, how are you feeling? And sitting in front of those people, I could actually see that they were touched. But I don't know if it was somebody else that was supposed to reach out,
And Nomonde, was your experience similar to that, or do you feel differently?
I would say it's similar, but when I was sitting in front of the TRC commission, it was like something that I have been yearning to have, something that I was wishing to happen in my life. So when I was sitting there confronting the commission, seeing these people sitting there, and I could sense remorse, I could sense their interest in my story, I could sense that they were listening to me. So while I was talking to them about what happened and my wishes and what I think should have happened to my husband, and all those things that were inside me, the pain that I had inside started to overwhelm my body and to come up. And the only way that I could share my pain with them is to cry, so that they can see my pain, not only hear my pain, but can see my pain. So my body reacted, and I cried that cry, because it was very painful for a very long time. And my wish was always to have someone that I can go to and talk about the pain. I couldn't go to the local magistrate and tell him that, look, I think this happened to my husband. I think that my husband was killed by the state security forces. I couldn't do that to the magistrate. You would have thought that I am just talking nonsense, because I tried with my doctor. If you could remember that time I was pregnant when my husband passed on. So I used to go to the doctor. So when I went to the doctor that afternoon, and the doctor asked me, "How are you, Mrs. Calata?" I said, "I'm not fine, because I think this happened to my husband." My own doctor said, "No, it can't be. It's the Azapo who did that." So I had those pains where I could, at a later stage, be able to relieve it with my cry at the TRC.
And living with that pain, which you both describe as being so acute and so bodily at that time, what has it been for you over the years? I mean, people talk about the way that the body holds pain, the way that the body, in a sense, becomes, it's both the carrier, but it's a kind of archive of the pain and the experience. How have you managed to live these 30-odd years with the pain both of that moment and with the pain of that loss, that fundamental loss which has shaped your lives?
With me, I would say pain is part of my life. It depends on how I react to it. Like any other person who has illness, to me, it looks like it's an illness that I will forever have. So there are days when I have to talk to the pain and say, you know what, you're not going to control me now. I am in control as a single parent, you know. The pain will show itself anytime, you know. When I see my son growing up as a single person, and I did not choose to be a single parent, you know, somebody out there decided, so that pain, you know, comes out. Mm-hmm. But I must have a way of controlling it. Mm-hmm. You know, there are times when the pain doesn't show, you know, and I'll be a normal person, you know. Not everybody will see that, you know, I'm hurting, you know, until such time. You know, there are times when I used to attend school meetings. I mean, most of the meetings I held in the evenings. I will go there. Before, I was not mobile. Had to take public transport. There were no Ubers. And that pain will show. It will show up. Because definitely, and my husband, as a provider, he would have been there, to attend those meetings. He did while my son was still attending, crèche. But I had to endure that pain. There are times, again, when my son, like for instance, we're happy, not long, he received an award from Metro FM. I was happy, but I was also in pain because I thought if my husband was around, we would be together, enjoying the fruits.
And for you, Nomonde, I mean, how have you managed to navigate that over the years?
It's very, very difficult to explain how one navigates through these years with this pain. Because at many times, to me, it kept on coming back. I had to be strong. I had to hide sometimes the pain from my children. I had to act bravely when I go outside so that my enemy could not see how deep they hurt me. But when you are alone, when you go back, and you are in your room, you go back, then the pain hits you. And you have to deal with it alone. And you have to confront it. Because you have no way of, when you're alone, to run away from it. And the only way to ease the pain, for me, is to cry. I cry. I cry a lot. I cry and I ask some questions. I confront my husband at times. I got angry for the people who caused the pain to me. As Seipati is saying now, there's times when you have to go and attend your children's school activities. My son was playing rugby. I think he's still angry with me till today about one Saturday when he really played so hard and I couldn't go there because I had to go and look for a job so that he can be able to have food. So I couldn't be there. He will always mention that. I tried to make it up for many others, but that one was specifically because he scored 2 goals and he was doing it for me, yet I was not there. And those things hurts. One of his friends are here, Nadine. She can. The evening of their graduation, I was seated there and I saw my child walking down that aisle and I was alone. I couldn't control my tears because I was thinking that here am I seated alone. Yet another man, another father, another husband took my husband's life away, took the life of my children's father away. And here am I seated all by myself to come and support my child. It's very difficult.
Can I ask you to reflect upon the particular kind of widowhood that you have both experienced? You were deprived of your life partners, of your husband, of your children's father in a very violent way. And you ended up as political widows, a particular kind of widowhood that I think has a very particular set of connotations. And do you think that particular role that you have played in your own imagination, in your own life, in your own experience, in your own parenting, as well as in the public imagination, entails a particular kind of loss that is distinguished from other forms of widowhood. What is it to be a political widow? What does that come freighted with for you?
Very difficult to be a political widow. It's very difficult.
What does it mean for you, Nomonde?
It means, in this particular era, it means you mean nothing except when politicians want to use you. Then you become somebody. But other than that, you're nothing. You are forgotten. Your whole family is forgotten. When you speak, you bitter. When you confront, you're wrong. Not only does it happen to us as political widows, as I would say, it happens even to our children. They are nobody. They mean nothing. And that is hurting so much. To be a political widow, it's terrible. It's rather to be an ordinary black widow, knowing that your husband was sick and you managed to nurse him and give him medicine, you know. But in our situation is that the thing is going on because the thing that he thought he was doing and fighting for is being ignored by those who are in authority today and by those who are in power today. So you mean nothing.
Do you have the same experience, Seipati?
Yeah. In my case, I would say the society has high expectations. I don't know if they always think that you have something, like financially you are, you know, well off, and they don't know. You know, with me, people think that I am getting perhaps a monthly allowance from the government, you know, and I guess I don't have to always explain to people. I am working, you know. I also thought perhaps as a political widow, you know, we will be recognized, you know, and met halfway. Because I know that my husband, if he was still around, he would be providing, you know, for his family, you know. There is a salary that was lost. But people out there, as a political widow, they think we get it, you know. I don't know if they equate us to those people who are in positions, in government positions, and we get nothing, you know. And, you know, it is difficult because they also expect us to act a certain way if you are a political widow. And again, it's like you now live in a shadow of your husband, because whenever I present myself, I am now always somebody's wife. You know, I'm no longer Seipati. You know, it is difficult.
And as mothers, do you feel that you have had to protect your children from that burden of having assassinated fathers and having to live within the aura of that? I mean, to what extent is the absent father an idealized figure to whom they have to live up? Is that a burden for them to bear? Of course, there's the huge gap and the hole. They have to deal with the grieving mother, which is itself a very big burden for a child. But they also have to deal with this ideal image of an absent father who died for a cause. How has that been in terms of your own family dynamics and as mothers?
I'd say it is a challenge. You know, with my son, I always tell him to try not to mention his father's name when he meets people or when he negotiates for things, you know, because in my mind, you know, I think that will put pressure on him, and I also believe that he must fend for himself without using his father's name. That's my belief. And there are situations where, like for instance, it will happen that his father's name has to be raised. But it shouldn't be like if I introduce myself, that everywhere I go, I tell people that I am, you know, so-and-so's wife. Then I'm no longer me. And people will always look me through my husband. And it becomes a problem. So as a mother, you have to be always a teacher, you know, to children, you know, and advise them to say, you know what, no, this is right. Perhaps this is too much. That's what I always do with my son.
It is difficult, as she's saying, you know, to always protect your children from being hurt by maybe using the name. And I was fortunate, my children don't really like to use the name. Yeah, I've got my youngest daughter, Tumani. She used to work at a municipality. So their names are written there. Whenever you ask her, what is your name? She's going to say, I'm Tumani. And it ends there. Because she always told me that people always think that we want to be recognized or want to be known by the name of my father, and that is not it. We don't want to use my father's name to get somewhere. We have to get ourselves where we want to be without using his name. And it's difficult, because even if you do that, it still follows you. Right now, as I'm sitting here, I'm like thinking that in Kredok, where I live, people used to respect their leaders, for Calata, Metikoni, and so on. So people used to respect me as well as the wife of Fort Calata. But now, today, with this new era, I'm hated. Not by the community of Kredok, but from the people who's working for the government institutions, because they think that we want positions because of the names of our husband. And that is not the issue here. That is absolutely not the issue here. We live our lives as normal people. But there's one thing that we can't take away is the fact that our husbands were assassinated for their political activities within the communities. We can't take that history away. We can't run away from that. I can't not be Nomonde Calata because I got married to Fort on the 25th of October 1980. I became his wife. We have children. He was my husband. I loved him. I supported him in what he was doing. He was a teacher. A lot of children and a lot of other people knows him. We grew up in Kredok. We can't run away from that. But today, when you mention Nomonde Calata, it sounds like poison. That is the problem that we are sitting with now in this new era.
So I hear the bitterness and I hear the disappointment. If we turn to this moment now, that your husbands fought for something, for an ideal, for a better future, for a better dispensation, for equality, for all those things, that you suffered the ultimate sacrifice and your children did. And now you look at the political dispensation and at their reputation and your reputation, and I feel that you feel betrayed.
Definitely.
So what do we do? That is a further layer of pain, not only the pain of loss and grief and the political widowhood and the mothering as a single parent and all the challenges that you have faced, but the lack of retributive justice, the lack of compensation that you, Seipati, talked about, the bitterness about a new generation who perhaps you feel look at you as, you know, people who want to take, or what does one do with that disappointment? I know that you, Nomonde, are involved in an ongoing battle with the Crown Prosecution Services and have felt very betrayed by their inability. And both of you feel that you have not received the justice that you needed and deserved. Can you talk to us a bit about what those feelings feel for you now?
It's terrible. It's, we have been waiting for justice for a very long time. It never happened. Until 2017, where me and my son, you know, started to just go public with our feelings and with our quest for justice. It's a long struggle. We tried everything until we were convinced by the NPA in 2022 that we must take the option of an inquest where they will be able to subpoena some of the perpetrators or some other witnesses that can come and testify at the inquest. We struggled with that, but eventually we agreed with them. And eventually the Minister of Justice gave us a date for the inquest. And we were ready, you know. We were looking forward to have this inquest. Until I got very much disappointed when I heard the news last week, Friday, that the inquest that was supposed to start on the 2nd of September this year, till the 20th of September, has been postponed. Because the same NPA claim that are not ready. And the lawyers of the perpetrators is still looking for clarity for finance. so they can help their clients. You know, I felt so sad. I felt so deeply hurt. I'm still feeling very, very deeply hurt about that, because that was the opportunity and the chance for me to be able to also give my testimony to the judge about how do I feel and what do I think. But all in vain. All in vain. I'm deeply, deeply, deeply disappointed. And I try to tell my children that this hurts. I feel betrayed again. I feel violated again. After so many years, the violence is following. It doesn't stop. Why? Why? And the NPA said, we are ready. We are going to have these people. You are going to have closure. You are going to be able to put this thing behind you. But now, last week, Friday, it's something else. Again. Betrayal. Huh? Why? Keep on hurting us. Why? What did we do? Was it wrong for my husband to fight and to educate people of his community about their rights, about their human rights? Was it wrong? Why should we be punished? Because this is a punishment. I don't know. As I'm saying, I'm deeply hurt. I'm angry for the NPA. I'm angry for the Department of Justice. I'm very, very, very angry. I'm sad. I don't know how am I going to confront them. I don't know what am I going to say to them when I have to meet them. Because this is the greatest betrayal after so many years.
Seipati?
Yeah. I guess we still have to make noise until we are heard, if we are going to be heard. And it's so unfortunate that the people that we thought will help us are not hearing us. And as Nomonde mentioned, it is a betrayal. And we are betrayed by our own. And we cannot just talk anyhow because we are afraid that we will be called names now, that we are now enemies. But I still believe that somebody out there one day will hear us, but we cannot stop making noise. And you know what is happening, Nomonde, we need to talk. You know, all the platforms that we get, we still have to mention our pain, our hurt until we are heard. And it's so unfortunate because the perpetrators, the people who killed, are the ones that are benefiting from our very own. You know, they are getting paychecks every month and we're not even consulted. You know, it would also be nice if, like for instance, in our case, when the perpetrator was released, we were never advised. We heard that from the media. You know, you will get calls from people saying, have you heard? It's like the first person that was supposed to have been informed is informed by the media. And our very own people that are supposed to be saying, you know what, we are going to release this person on the grounds that, you know what, maybe, you know, as they say, that they got everything that they wanted from him, but we never advised.
It's so incredibly painful to sit with you and to hear you talk about this. And at the same time, I am so moved by your strength, by your presence, by your continued ability and willingness to share your experiences with us. And it's very, very powerful, that the bravery that you show in the face of your own personal history, but also in the face of this broader political abandonment, in a sense, that you are describing. So before I ask Sisonke to come up and to comment on what we've exchanged, could you tell us where that strength comes from? I know that you are weeping, and I know that it feels like a very raw place, but nevertheless, it also feels powerful. And I wondered if you could share with us where that strength comes from. How can we learn from it?
I don't know, because apparently we have to live. We have to live for our children. So I guess that strength comes from knowing that you have to fend for your family, so you can not give up, you know, anytime soon. And you also get the strength of knowing that somewhere out there, you know, the youth, they will hear this and do something about it. You know, so that's where the strength is coming from, that we cannot die with our husband, you know, and wherever they are, I believe they know and they have hopes that as we remain, we will do something still. As I said before, the only thing that we can do is to still make noise about the injustice.
As Seipati is saying, it's true. We get the strength from protecting our children, and because of the love that we have for our husband. I loved my husband. He loved me too, I know that. So whatever I'm doing it with that strength of love, because I loved him. So I had to protect the children, our children, and be strong for them. Maybe the strongness is coming from that. And it's also coming from the fact that I'll fight for you, Ford, no matter what. I will show them no matter what. If they want to break me, I won't break. I will fight. I think the strength is coming from that, and you know.
Thank you both. How absolutely wonderful and extraordinary to sit with you in this space and to hear your reckoning with your own experience. It's a privilege for all of us. Thank you. I'm now going to ask Sisonke Msimang to join us over here on the platform. Many of you will know her work, her beautiful book, Always Another Country, which I have just had the pleasure of re-looking at, having read it when it first came out. A different generation in a way, Sisonke, and I think that that's so important, that you talk about your own experience as the child. Oh, wait a minute. You talk about your experience as the child of political exiles, growing up as you did in Zambia and elsewhere, and traveling around the world. And yeah, we would just love to hear your response to the conversation that we've heard.
So, hello everyone. I want to begin by thanking Rome for sharing their stories, very difficult stories, difficult to hear that one and not be moved. So you will forgive me as we talk, because it was takes us back, doesn't it? And I guess it's appropriate it takes us back 30 years to the beginning of this country's story, in some ways, this new part of our story. So I just want to acknowledge that it's a heavy feeling in the room, and that I am feeling particularly moved. And in some ways, I guess, feeling a little bit lucky to hear the stories from the women who have lived this very long story themselves, but also very mindful that the tears to be taken most seriously are these tears. But I guess I'm thinking now as I'm sitting here, why am I so moved? And I guess it's because the stories that we hear are not only the stories of the people who experience them. That these are collective stories, and this is the story of our country, and it is the story of women. So it's important, I think, that we acknowledge that this is a story of a country unfolding. And so in some ways, Tamar, I don't want to answer your question directly, because I think my personal story is not so relevant to this one. The book that I think is interesting in this regard is the Winnie book, is the resurrection of Winnie Mandela, but again in a very different way. And so I was reflecting on, how do we think together about this pain? And I think the best way for me to think about it is to think about it as, what is the meaning of a story? What does it mean to tell a story? Why do we tell stories? And in part, I'm thinking about it this way because that's the work that I very much am engaged in on a daily basis, both as a writer, not as an academic. I always feel intimidated in these spaces because I'm not I don't have a doctorate. I write because I'm cheeky, not because I have any particular skills to give me and I'm not trained in it. But also because I care deeply about stories. And in my work, working for NGOs, working at the Center for Stories, a lot of what we do is help people to tell their stories. And so the first question that you then have to answer is, what is a story for? What is a story? And so for me, a story is an event plus meaning. It's a very simple equation. An event plus the meaning we make out of that event. The thing happened. How do I make sense of what had happened? And the historical role of mothers is to make sense for our children of what happened to us. That is, so stories are the oldest app for teaching, Before we had mobile phones, we had stories that you tell the child something and then they learn. And I was struck so much in the conversation now about why you continue is because of your children, yeah? So we tell the story because of our children. And so I'm struck in this conversation that the husbands are gone, but the children live. And that is the case, in fact, for all of us as a nation, right? As South Africa, the comrades, whatever happened to them, whether they lived, whether they died, whether they stayed true, whether they became corrupt, whatever that is, the comrades are now gone and the new young ones are here. There's this new generation who are here. And so the act of storytelling is about teaching. I'm also very mindful that often teaching implies that there's a lesson, that there's something you learned from the story. In the storytelling, work that I do, we always say to people, tell your story from your scar, not from your wound. But of course, when it's still a wound because there has been no resolution, I have to say, and as I think about it, maybe that is why, in addition to just the facts, I think that's why it's very moving to listen to you, because you're still telling the story from the wound, which is a very difficult thing to do. Very, very difficult thing to do. So I've rambled and didn't really answer your question.
It's good. It's good. No, those are so interesting, those observations. And this idea of the difference between the scar and the wound is so interesting, because of course the scar is the trace of the wound, which is never really healed. So whether it's the wound or the scar is an ongoing question.
I think for myself, when I think about the relationship I have, if I hurt myself and I have a cut, and then I'm telling you about it today, then I'll say, oh, Tamar, I cut myself. And even as I'm telling you, I'm doing this. I'm protecting it. I'm not really showing it fully. But I can say, oh, when I was 7, let me tell you this story. And it's a different relationship with the story. And I can show it to you like this. So there's something transformative about a scar. And it implies, and I know it's a loaded word, but it implies a sense of healing. And in our story, we know as South Africans, no matter what, because this is all of our story, in some ways, that without justice, it's very difficult to talk about healing. It's very difficult to talk about what you learned from an experience. So what do you learn from suffering if there has been no even small consolation? I don't know. That's, for me, the scar is the thing that because it happened, but it's the wound that has to be.
And the other thing that I guess is also invoked by that, and we've been invited to think about the body as an archive, in the way in which our bodies bear the traces of the past in all sorts of ways. And of course, as mothers, we know that in so many ways. I mean, Pumla has written so much about inimba and the umbilical, and the way in which the navel is the trace on our own bodies of our connectedness, both to our own mothers, but of our children's connectedness to us, in the sense of a kind of continuity and a bodily connection between generations and between people who identify. So I'm very interested in the way in which the scars and the imprints of our experience leave their trace, whether it's in the lines on our faces or on the marks of our body. And I think that's one of the things also to think about, and these are sometimes abstracted and sometimes quite physical. So interesting also to think with that. But I think we could open it up now. So if there are people who have questions. Who would like to say something? Dorothy, would you like to say something?
I think primarily sure. I just want to be able to say thank you to both our mothers. I know how difficult it is each and every time they have to speak about their experiences. We were in Gauteng not so long ago, and Manda was telling me, I've decided that my mom is no longer going to speak because it is not a nice experience for her to actually always have to open herself up. And then afterwards, we have to struggle and to go through all those emotions together. When you as an audience have finished listening, for us that conversation continues. And we spoke about it. For me, what makes it difficult is that I'm a psychologist, so I believe that stories must be told. And no matter how hard or how difficult stories are, we still have to be able to tell them. And I then get to be the person who works after the people have spoken in public. I'm the one who speaks to the people after. And that's why I said I would like to start by thanking you. And I've ventured into wanting to know how our mothers and us feel by exploring the narratives of the Craddock Four families. It's difficult work because it really does affect you. I think I've stopped writing for a period of about a year. When I had to go through my own trauma that was not even related to the trauma of the Craddock Four. But because I've so bravely managed my trauma of the death of my father, when I was then hit with my own life crisis, I then had to stop and realistically look at what it is that I was going through. And I think primarily because I understood then that trauma needs to be processed, and all the theories had to be applied, and it was something else.
Yeah.
But to come back to what was spoken about today, when you mentioned about you struggling, I was looking at you struggling and I was thinking, shame man, Danawald. It is because the wounds are still very, very, very open. Each and every one of the interviews that I have had when I was doing the study, there was a very big quest for justice. As a result, I'm stuck on the justice chapter because sometimes I write it so fast and I become advanced. And when the inquest was coming, I thought, wow, now it's going to have a proper ending.
Yeah.
And it's going to be difficult to go back to it again and leave it as a hanging, unfinished business. But what is striking for me is my work is particularly labeled political widowhood. And I was looking into the struggle of being a political widow, yet with taking up that agency of linking the dead and those alive. And how successfully the political widows do this without necessarily knowing or being aware of the role that it is that they are playing. And so it was interesting to sit and listen, more especially to Seipati today, when you're talking about the expectations today of a widow, like how people just assume that you are okay and you are being taken care of, and actually having nowhere to go to. Having nowhere to go to and no one to tell that you've got nothing. Except for us, your children, knowing and understanding that we all have got nothing. And how we did not become political activists or wanting to become active in politics because politics kill. That's why we are not in this space. However, we do political work because we do work in public to be able to emphasize these things. So I've learned a lot and I don't want to say too much.
Maybe Mandla, would you like to say something?
Yeah.
Mandla is Seipati's son, for those who don't know.
Growing up, I never really shared the story of what happened to my father, except to very, very few people. And it was a sort of way of protecting myself, and I think my mother did a very good job in actually sheltering me and in having a very good support system. I think that's one thing that she ensured that I had. And when I look at pictures of myself as a young kid, there were no signs to say that, no, this child is broken, he doesn't have a need of want. Everything was provided for me, and she made sure that she did that. And I reflect on the supportive system that she provided for me, and I'll repeat that. In that it's too easy to say, yeah, I grew up in a single family, and because of that, I can now destroy my life. And it's easy to blame other people, but she always taught me to take responsibility for my actions. And I think that was the biggest lesson that I learned from her. And it was only much later when I started processing this, that it actually did have an effect on me. And especially, I think, the one time that I remember weeping was when I learned that Dad Kotsia, the person that my father was representing at the time, passed away. It opened up such a can of worms in that. For me, it trying to speak to him or confronting him and trying to get the truth from him closed the chapter in my life that I wanted to still interrogate. But above all else, I mean, continually revisiting the story actually also opens other wounds in myself, and also asking myself, reliving that moment, that fateful day on the 15th of February, what could have been done differently? There's nothing that I can change right now, but I think there's a time in my life and a time in our lives that we have to say that we have to move on and create new stories.
Yeah.
And our stories are just not defined by that singular event. And I think we shouldn't just languish on that. And I believe that life is also for the living.
So true.
It just reminded me of something about talking about who you are and hiding the fact that you are Fort Calata's daughter. And eventually when you get older, you want people to remember your father because your father's memory is being silenced and suppressed. So you start talking about the fact that you are Fort Calata's daughter. Even if you are saying it to people who not necessarily want to listen and hear about Fort Calata. I think it's one of the things I sort of remembered.
Anybody want to?
Thank you so much. Can anyone hear me? Okay. Prof. Pumla, thank you for this configuration. You know, it's opened up something for me internally. As a researcher, I research in the afterlife of violence. I research in the Black woman's body being an archive and a repository for memory. So when I heard about this event, I thought, oh, this is going to be perfect for my research. I'm going to come, I'm going to ask questions, I'm going to engage, academically and so on. But it's not that, it doesn't feel like that kind of a space, because you begin to realize, one of the things I write about is the Mbogodofication of Black women and how we are celebrated all the time for our capacity to be strong and to endure. And like you were saying, Mam Seipati, there's this element of you having been taken to the TRC and expected to behave like an actress. There's something about you being seen to be in pain that was relevant and important. But when it comes time to support you, when it comes time to ensure that you get justice, there's abandonment and there's betrayal. And I think 30 years on, into this new democracy, there's still this huge abandonment of women, where when it's August and it's Women's Month, let's celebrate, and Mbogodo A, B, and C, but there is so much betrayal that we experience at the hands of society and government when it comes to actually supporting us. And to have come here thinking that I was going to somehow, extract knowledge, and realizing that I'm actually given an opportunity to be in support of these stories and be part of a community that for once is not trying to instrumentalize Black women, I think is so powerful and so important. And so all of my questions and things will remain in the notebook. And I think I appreciate just the ability to be here and experience this and see what I can do, I suppose, to offer a form of support and understanding, because I think that's what is important. And as we move between generations, maybe then it is our generation's responsibility to be listening to understand, seeking to see what we can do to ensure that this justice is continued, because we have to pick it up and continue with this. Njengoba nisho ukuthi you have continued to fight for this, to continue to make noise, because it comes from the love of your husbands, it comes from the love of the community, it comes from understanding what they were trying to do and knowing that you have to continue to live for that. We have to do that as well. And when we see the shift in communities who once respected you, now beginning to view you with a sort of resentment, thinking now you want something, we are here having heard your stories, and we are able to change that narrative in some way, even in a small way. And I think that is really what matters. So thank you so very much. Siyabonga.
Thank you very much for being so brave as to bare your hearts and your history. And what it did for me was it meant you were bearing my history. And I think it's incredible, considering how long apartheid lasted for, that this is probably one of the first times in my life that I'm sitting in a room with people who, yes, granted, my parents have lived through it too, but have such visceral reactions in your bodies, but also in the upbringing of your families, to sit in a room with me and for me to be able to hear you and feel you, and see how the beauty about the wound and the scar, and that the scar, even though not entirely healed, is so important because it validates the wound. So it's giving us an opportunity, listening to those stories validates the truth about it, and then talking about it, and you being so brave to stand and speak and share, and not share in the expectation to receive any closure from us, and knowing that you couldn't, but doing it for the reasons that you need to do it for, really alters the way I'm understanding the power of our collective storytelling, the power of us being able to, and even more than that, to be in this particular space and telling that story is really what changes this for me, really what shifts the ground, because Stellenbosch for me has been a big space of erasure, and a big space of one version of a story. And the story is very whole, so there's a lot of parts that are not getting spoken about, and to hear the parts that are not getting spoken about, that are dismissed, that are written, not even written out of history, just completely ignored, intentionally, is so powerful, because your story and your truth reinstates that position, the fight, the thing that your husbands risked their lives for, and that they risked their families and their futures, and in turn, I suppose, they also all understood the danger of it. So their legacies, the truth, the choice to fight for this thing meant that you were putting your legacy on the line and risking your family, and it is incredible this reiteration of Black women in families and the power of this female lineage that, yes, Bali in all senses is driven by how strong and powerful we are, but because we unfortunately because we unfortunately have that ability, it has given us the fortunateness of being able to survive, of being able to get through it. And it isn't something that we want to take further, but it's definitely something that we must acknowledge and see, because you have made it possible for us to want to hold that space, even if we didn't live and exist in that space, and love and support you, even though we're not blood related to you, or we don't have those stories are not my personal family stories, but they are in so many ways connected to exactly what we go through. And the reminder of the importance of us talking about these things, and that it gives us strength and encouragement. My research is in storytelling, and just a reminder about the importance of saying the thing. And sometimes the documentation of it doesn't have to be there. That it holds the exact same weight if, I can feel it in the body. It holds the same weight if we were just sitting across from each other to a public platform like this that allows us to be reminded of what you've been through and are going through, and what you need from the future of this country, what you need from the future of the democracy, and what we are then responsible for, and need to do to have the change for you and for us and for our children and our families to come as well. And so just thank you for bearing your hearts, thank you for being present. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Feel like such inadequate words to talk to you. I want to make a comment, but I first want to say to both of you, I have the very big pleasure of knowing Dorothy. And I don't know Mandla, but I have seen his work and watched an interview with him not long ago. And you have, from what I can see, I don't think parents take enough credit for their part in making beautiful children and raising beautiful children. And I think you did that despite the hardship and the difficulty. So just something short, Seipati, something that will go with me from this meeting is one of your first remarks when you said, I went to the TRC, I did not expect much, I just wanted the truth. And I thought about that. I didn't expect much, just the truth. And it's really compelling me to think about what this thing is, this thing of truth. How do we look for it? Where do we look for it? Who do we involve in looking with us for it? What is this truth thing? So thank you for that.
As I was preparing for today, I was a bit anxious to come, but I think for me, I was telling Omam Nomonde, the first time I heard her was in 2018. It was when we had, I think it was one of our first conferences as AVRIC. And I remember yesterday when we were in class with the honors students, I couldn't find words to describe what it meant for me to hear you again. And I had to go back and think about why I did my PhD and why I struggled. And it was because I couldn't understand what was going on. And now I think I found the words. There's, what's it in English? It's a reawakening almost of the fact that as a country, I think the voices of women and what women have given it's not recognized in national memory. Yesterday, when we were sitting in class, with the honors students, some of them are here, a lot of them said that they didn't know about these stories, that they didn't know that there were women who were in the anti-apartheid struggle. They didn't know that there were women who lost their lives, who lost their husbands. A lot of them didn't know about this. And I think the biggest thing for me is now asking Uguti, now that we know, what do we do? Senzani. We've heard Uguti, all these things have happened. I've heard it. And I guess the greatest question that sat with me with everything that I've done, and more so in these past few days, I don't know if it's the universe conspiring almost. I see Dr. Uhuru is here, who also was a part of me wanting to know more about women's stories. I guess the greatest question is, Senzani manje? Genzani, now that I know the story. I put so much effort, I guess, in wanting women's stories to be heard. And it was difficult because, as you know, people have mentioned, I had to make people believe that it was the truth. And despite all my best efforts, it somewhat feels as if there's still that lingering. And I guess the question becomes, where then do women go for such stories to actually be seen as truth? What needs to actually happen? And I guess it's a question I'm asking myself as a young person. Uguti, what do I do? What is my role in this beyond just holding space? Where do I take this and what do I do with it? And ngifuna nje ukubonga kakhulukazi, ngibonge nje lokho esenikwenzile. Ngiyazi ukuthi akukho lula, kodwa ngiyabonga njengomuntu omncane ukuthi nifikile nabona ngathi kubalekile ukuthi nikhulume ngazo lezi zinto lezi. Ngithemba ukuthi anilahli ithemba, ngicabanga ukuthi senikwenzele nje in vain. Nazi ukuthi ngazo zonke indlela sizozama ngoba sinizwile. So ke nje ngiyabonga kakhulu, ngiyazehlisa ngempela, ngiyanibonga nobabili. Ngibonge futhi kakhulukazi ngimama Nomonde, ngosis Dorothy, ngoba loluthando loli nokho kunzima kuwe, kodwa loluthando lolumnike lona emzimeni bakho sekusiza abantu abaningi, and yimi omunye wabo labantu labo. So ngiyabonga kakhulu ngithemba ukuthi mawukuthi ukulahlekelwe ithemba uzothi kunzima, wazi ukuthi kodwa khona uzamile and imizamo yakho iyaqhubeka ngendlela onawe ubungeke uyicabanga. So ke nje ngiyabonga kakhulu ngakho konke senikwenzile ma.
Thank you very much for very powerful and insightful stories and for your brevity. And I'm Yumi, and I studied in Northern Ireland, where 30 years of conflict and violence, bloodshed, shatters their society. And I interviewed particularly mothers in Northern Ireland who lives through the troubles, the conflict. And I found a lot of similarity with the stories I heard in Northern Ireland to your stories. And I interviewed like the political widows and widows of security force people, and those who were the wives of political activists, and they were very powerful and strong, and in Northern Ireland and in Japan, that's where I am from, Japan, and we say that mothers are strong because so they can prioritize their children. They say I live for my children. So they are not allowed to express some emotions like anger or resentment and hatred. Some of them still had like very strong hatred against the other side of the communities, some mothers were quite resentful about their husband who took his life because of trauma of the troubles. So I thought that there should be spaces, safe spaces like this, where mothers can be not strong, so they're not strong, and where they can be angry, or where they can express their grief,
Thank you for that. It reminds me, Pumla, perhaps you want to say about the me time that, we were in conversation in 2018 when Nomonde said, where is my time? And we've been talking about that, Pumla.
That you say that because that's exactly what came to my mind. I was going to go back actually to that. So there's the 30 years that you are reflecting on, but really what started it is in 2018. Nomzamo was referring to that conference we had in 2018, where we had a similar conversation in a much smaller room. It was really tight and very packed and body to body, and all the children were there. The one that Nomonde was expecting at the time, her husband was assassinated, was in the room, and it was very, very much, it was really about bodies talking to each other in such a way that's such a powerful way. And Nomonde was speaking about how all the years have been about every other person, not herself. And she kept on saying, I want me time. I want me time. In fact, yesterday, you will remember the students in class, she repeated that, I want me time. And so she's here for 2 weeks, actually, for that me time. Because we've got to have a name for it. She's in residence at AVREC. and the only reason Seipati is not in residence is because she has to go back. She couldn't get leave because she had another longer leave. So she couldn't take leave this time. So we kept on trying to see how can she fit it in. She couldn't take a long leave because we wanted them both to be in residence for 2 weeks. And so that is also so important. So the question back to you is, what does this mean for you both? What does it, there's always a question that is asked, and in a way it was alluded to that, you hear, you tell your stories, and then what happens? So can you share with us, what does this mean for you, so that we can, as we leave, we know and understand why you agreed to do this? So I'd like both of you to share with us, what is it for you that draws you to these moments of telling your story in public in this way? If you could, please. And then I know that Caesar wants us to wrap up, but could you have the last question for Tamar?
For me, it gives me hope. As one of you mentioned that, we hear you, we're listening, and I hope that, something will be done. It cannot be perhaps for us, but for a generation of people that will come after us. And it's just the hope that I have. And in a way, it is relieving, it's a healing in a way, because as, the psychologists always say, talking about it heals. I know that after this, I will feel rejuvenated.
Well, for me, it's the same. It's like I got the opportunity to receive as well. When I talk to you and you listen, for me, it says a lot. It brings that relief in me, because there is people out there who is sharing the pain with. By you sitting here and listening to me, and I'm talking to you, it's a big thing. It's like I get more relief within myself, because I share my pain with you and you take it.
Well, thank you for that gift, and I'm really so relieved and happy to feel that we have nourished you in some way in return. It is what we wish to do. We wish to honor you. We wish to nourish you. And we wish to share our love with you. And thank you, everybody, for sharing this space with us. It's been so incredibly moving. Thank you.
This is certainly not a somber occasion, it's a contemplative one, because this is the stories that sit with us as a nation. I think it was very difficult for the audience to engage, especially because South Africa's history is one that's symbolic and grandiose and loud, and it's a romantic story. But then when we listen to these stories, we are reminded of those granular experiences. I also want to bring our attention back to the fact that we are sitting on the grounds of the intellectual cradle of apartheid. And in listening to your stories, it's quite often that we overlook how apartheid affected people's everyday. And especially as the generation born post-1994, who gets the big Mandela narratives, it's very rare that we get to engage with these. And I like to draw back to a book project that Prof. Pumla led, is that these are the things that sit with us as a nation. So my most sincere thanks to Mrs. Calata and Mlangeni for sharing these stories, and because you didn't have to share it with us. But there's a sense of urgency around communicating within these spaces and beyond. And it was very, very difficult to listen to it, but we have to listen. We have to sit down and listen. So thank you so much, even to Prof. Tamar, who held the space in such a beautiful way. Sisonke, thank you for your response, because I think especially from your generation, Mandla as well, thank you so, so much for the children of these mothers, for sharing your reflections and your experiences as well. Dorothy as well, thank you so, so much. So this evening, we have part 2 of these sessions, of this particular session. Even if you have not registered, please do join us at 5 o'clock this evening, because we are planning on extending the conversation that we had this afternoon. So while we move over to lunch, please join us for a light lunch in this back section over here. Let's keep the energy and keep the engagement, and I'll see you all this afternoon at 5. Thank you.